Today's session is about Prime Center. I am Michiel. There we go, that's my name. And I'll be hosting this one. Just a reminder, next week's session is the final one of the IC3D sessions. It's also going to be about automation. So that will also be an interesting one. Make sure to register for that one if you're interested in IC3D. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns during this session, feel free to use chat or unmute yourself and speak up. This is a cafe, which means we are allowed to talk to each other and make this more of a conversation than a presentation. A quick intro on today's goal is, well, we're going to look at Prime Center, we're going to look at Caldera RIP, and we're going to see how, if you're using something like a webshop, which would essentially generate files for you that have to be printed, how you would take those files and automatically parse them, take the information, do something with them, and send them to the RIP with the tools from Caldera, so with Prime Center and Caldera RIP. Of course, there are other tools that can be used for this. Things like Unfocus Switch can be used to make this process more intelligent and to automate other tools inline as well. But you don't have to always go like the full mile to get to a level of automation that can improve your productivity. Sometimes some of the tools can already provide quite a benefit, and you can use a few small steps to get an advantage instead of having to go for everything at once. So first of all, let's see what the products are. So Prime Center is the most recent tool released by Caldera. It's a tool meant for nesting. That's the main thing that it does, is intelligent nesting. But it also contains automated pre-flighting inside the application. And besides the nesting, it can do ganging. In the context of Prime Center, these words do not mean the same thing. Nesting is what they call the irregular nesting of jobs. So you have multiple jobs that are rectangles or are irregular shapes, and you try to put them all together as efficiently as possible to not waste paper. That's what they mean with nesting. Ganging in this scenario is grouping a number of nested elements together and making them a single file. So you can nest all the jobs that are for the same customer, and you can gang them onto the same file. And then the second customer will be ganged together on a second file. That is what they mean with nesting and ganging. And then Prime Center allows for several levels of automation. You can do everything manually. You can set up a semi-automated workflow, or you can set up a full automatic workflow that handles your files. In Prime Center, you can make recipes, which are essentially profiles that contain a bunch of configurations where you say, okay, for every file that goes through this recipe, I want to make this amount of bleed. I want to nest in this manner. I want to gang in this manner. I want to add this type of die line. I want to add these marks with QR codes that tell the next application what's going on. You can make all these configurations for a recipe. And then you can make a bunch of recipes that each have their own configurations that are doing things to create a specific output for a specific device or production process. And you can have all of those connected to hot folders that control the input files or the output files if you're working with an automated flow. And then, of course, we have Caldera RIP, which is a powerful RIP in the direction of large format, which can do color management and spot color management as well, and which also allows you to work with hot folders and workflows. A lot of people use Caldera RIP in a very manual way. They have the RIP on their system, they open the files using the file manager, and they handle their files one by one. But I've seen with customers that a lot of them don't actually use the hot folder functionality. While that can add a lot of value, especially in time saved, if you're doing a very repetitive process. If you're always going to be working on 1, 2, 3 printers, and you're always using the same types of substrates, and you're always really using files that have already been pre-flighted, that have the right colors, that have the right size, then maybe you don't need to do a lot of manual actions inside Caldera RIP. If you're only inserting your file, opening it in a printer, and saying print, then you can automate that. You can have the file go into a hot folder, be automatically loaded into Caldera RIP, go into your printer, be automatically ripped, be in your spooler, and even automatically start printing in the queue if you want to. But you can also do each part of that flow separately and hold on to control. So that's the two applications that we're using. And then the concept that we're trying to go with for this session is actually quite simple. We want to come from some kind of input, which is our nice orange car and which represents the web shop, but it could be anything else really that gets you your files. We want to connect the files that come in from the web shop to our Prime Center, which is going to do pre-flighting and nesting and getting us a production-ready file. And then after Prime Center, we can connect that production-ready file straight to the RIP and have it be ripped. This is kind of the workflow we're building, which is very simple, right? You could make these workflows a lot more complex if you have different processes. So we'll look at these steps one by one. First off is the incoming file, the orange car. I made this little web symbol as incoming, but again, any process you have that gives you files can be accepted here. The only thing is they should be relatively consistent. You want to have the same types of files coming into a flow because automation starts with standardization, which means that to have a good automatic workflow, especially once you're having multiple variables that you want to take into account, you should control your input and you should have some form of normalization in your input files. So here I allowed for a few different types of files to come into my flow. I can either have the simple workflow where we get stuff like images and PDFs. That's really simple. We get actually our production files. We get the stuff that we want to work with. Or I can work with files that contain metadata. I can have XMLs, JSONs, JDFs that come into my flow. Now, in some cases, for example, if you're using a JSON or a JDF, you might have your file that you actually want to work with represented in there. There might be a link, a reference to where that file is supposed to be downloaded from or where that file is. Now, for JSON and JDF, you would have to have another application that interprets this and that brings you the image and the PDF, which then goes to Prime Center. Prime Center can't read those files. XML, however, if it's in the right format, can go straight to the input folder for Prime Center and can be interpreted directly. But they do work with quite a strict format. It has to have the right tags in the right hierarchy to have Prime Center interpret this correctly. This can be found in the manual, so it's quite clear how it works, and it's not a complex hierarchy. It basically says, here is your file, and these are the metadata tags that Prime Center likes to have. So the files go into your input folder. Like I said in the beginning, it doesn't have to be directly web to print to your Prime Center flow. You can have something else, which means you could have, for example, a nfocus switch in there. And that switch could interpret your JSON, your JDF, or also your XML, could have your FTP input, which takes the files from your web shop and interprets those files. As long as the files end up inside the input hot folder for your Prime Center as or an XML in the right format, or an image or a PDF, you're good. An image can be any kind of image format, even something like an Illustrator file or a Photoshop file should work correctly when you put them into Prime Center. For example, let's say the web-to-print system we're looking at here is Alien Placero, which is the web-to-print system that we also represent as 4Pees. They have a little tool that they developed themselves, the AWI, which takes the files from the web-to-print system and downloads those files onto your computer. Now, typically you would use that to put your files into Switch. But of course, if you're downloading files, you could just put them directly into the input folder for Prime Center, and then you get the ball rolling. You don't have to manually do anything. That tool checks the web shop every hour and gets all those files and puts them into the flow. So that part is automated. And then we have the second tool. Stuff ends up into that input folder. And then we have either the XML file that have the right format for Prime Center, or you have your images, or you already have your PDFs. Now, as stuff comes into Prime Center, there is a pre-flight step that happens while stuff is being imported into an automated version of Prime Center. The files, if they are images, will be converted to PDF by PDF Toolbox technology. So the files are coming in and they will be PDFs as soon as they are visible inside Prime Center. If they are XMLs, Prime Center will read them, will load the PDF, and will add the metadata to the PDF. If not, and we want to use this metadata, metadata can be important. If you want, for example, to label your job, if you know that you're going to have to print a certain sticker 100 times, you either have to load the image 100 times, or you have to tell the application, I want this sticker printed 100 times. Prime Center can do that either by using XML input data or by using the file name. Typically, when I do demonstrations of this, I use the file name. You just build the file name in a certain syntax. You make sure your Prime Center recipe understands that syntax, and then you use that to load your metadata. So if I have the information in the file name, I have metadata, I have my print file, and it's all coming into Prime Center. And then we have the pre-flighting happen. So there is a pre-flight step, but of course, since it is PDF Toolbox technology, you can do a whole lot of editing. You can basically run any profile, any fix-up, any process plan that you can make in Toolbox will work in Prime Center and is completely embedded. So in that way, it acts like a Toolbox server where it takes your file and it processes it using a certain KFPX file inside Prime Center linked to the recipe you're using. And then that file ends up in the Prime Center environment as a pre-flighted prepared file. In that environment, we're going to do the nesting. We can create bleeds, we can mirror objects, we can work with the die lines to prepare our cutting file. All of that can happen inside Prime Center. And then, depending on the recipe, you get your big nested sheet. And the sheet can be nested by Prime Center, can be ganged by Prime Center, and you get a whole bunch of layouts on the other side that are ready for production and are just lined up for you to work with. Now, again, Prime Center exists in three ways. You have the full manual flow, where you would have to load these files manually into Prime Center and then export the PDFs manually from Prime Center. You have the semi-automatic flow, where all of this happens automated, and you only have to export the file manually, or you have the completely automatic flow, which can do the import automated and the output automated, and which will put this file into a folder, and that folder can then also be the input hot folder for our RIP. So the next car is the RIP. These files come in from this nesting hanging part from Prime Center. They are inside the input folder, and here again, we have multiple options. We could take it easy and just have those files be loaded into our image bar, because the printers like to keep control, right? They want to see the files in their image bar and they want to say, okay, I would like to print this file now. I want to load it into my printer. I want to choose my material. I want to say, okay, we're going to get this running. That's good. You can keep control. But you can also go one step further and say, okay, we'll do it semi-automatically. I trust the system. I know that I'm going to be using a static configuration, which I prepared in Caldera RIP with a certain set of options. So I'll just say, whenever a file comes in from that recipe into that hot folder, I want to automatically load that file into my image bar and send it to the spooler with a certain printer configuration. Okay, that's cool. Then the file is ready in the spooler, and you can just have your spooler open on the computer that is next to your printer. You can right-click your file and you can say, print this file for me now. And then you still keep control over the printer, but you don't have to worry about any settings, any configurations beforehand. Or you can go full automatic and you can just have stuff go into the spooler, all ripped, lined up, queued, and have the printer print everything that comes into the spooler. Since the Prime Center will give you either big files from a certain length, like several meters in length, and the width of the roll, or it'll give you big sheets that are a certain X, Y width and height, the files that end up on your printer should be ready for print, and you shouldn't have to worry about stuff like materials or lining stuff up or putting stuff together. The file should already be the right width to be printed on your roll, and essentially you could just print everything in a roll, because your Caldera RIP will add your nice cutter marks at the top and the bottom. So if you can print your whole roll every time with a little mark, and then you put that roll on the Summa plotter, for example, and it reads those marks and it knows I have to cut this job, I have to cut this job, I have to cut this job, then you can have your entire system running overnight, essentially, getting jobs from the webshop, putting them through the Prime Center for the nesting and then putting them on the printer for the printing. And you can just take the roll of the printer when you arrive at the office in the morning and put it on the cutter and have it start cutting. That's essentially what you could be going for here if you take all the full automatic stuff. But I'd like to emphasize in this presentation that we can work bite-sized. We can implement any small step of what I described now and have already an advantage in production where you don't waste as much time for an operator. So again, the conclusion of what I have in this presentation is that you can have a really cool dinosaur car. No, it means that you can have any small step of this process automated and already get somewhere, or you can work full automation, or you can go further than what I described and have a big switch flow or flows that do a whole bunch of stuff for you. I'm going to already let this nice video play, and then I'll show a practical demonstration of what we're actually doing here. So going out of PowerPoint and putting it away for a second, let's look at my system. I have these files. These files here in this Finder, they come from my system. These come from the Web2Print system. You can see these have a certain syntax in how they're named. They're named customer ID 1_1_150-copies.pdf, for example. And all of these follow that same syntax. This is the syntax that I use in my Prime Center recipe to identify metadata for this file. So in this case, the metadata would be, I have the customer ID, I have a number, it might be a job ID, and I have the number of copies I want. It's basically a regular expression that takes the syntax and breaks it up into parts and then uses those parts to tag metadata inside Prime Center. Now, if I take my Prime Center, let me open that up. I have two recipes here. I have my manual recipe, I have my semi-automatic recipe. I can build as many recipes as I want, each with their own set of configurations. This is not going to be like a complete Prime Center demo. I think we have one of those on our YouTube already. If you are interested in getting a personalized demonstration for Prime Center and you want me to show you how it works, you have some questions, feel free to ask us questions, to send us an email, to request a demo, and we'll set something up. That's definitely possible. So you see here, in my input tab in Prime Center, I have extract properties from file name, which is used when you have the semi-auto or automatic versions of Prime Center called Pro and Max. So this looks customer ID _ job ID _ copies -copy. So it's the same syntax that I had for my file itself. Then I have here an input check or fixed profile. I can go to this list, and this gives me a list of all my PDF Toolbox profiles that I have linked to my Prime Center to use with Prime Center. So for example, I have a profile that I made that is not part of the default set that will fix cut contours, for example. I think this one, the contour check, or this one, create and apply a cut contour. This will make cut contours. I think in the last version of Prime Center, they actually added an extra profile for that. This one, create contour from page content, was added by Caldera themselves. So I can pick a profile, and any file that comes in will be handled with that profile. So you could have a step that checks and fixes your file as it comes in. Then I have all the other steps, so I can do mirroring, I can create a trim box, I can create my bleed, I can add annotations based off of my metadata. I haven't shown the metadata yet. If I open up an image, so let me just grab a sticker. If I take one of these penguins here and I open that up, importing image, let's give it a second, there we go. If I have an image and I select it, you can see here I get a bunch of metadata options. I can say, okay, I'm recognizing contours in the file, I know my quantity is one of the metadata tags, and I also know here at the bottom that I have customer ID, order ID, job name, gang name, comments. These 6 metadata fields can be filled in using these tags. So with this image, I don't have any yet. I would have to add them manually. Once I activate this automatic profile, it will import my files and it will attach these tags by itself. These tags can be used to create my annotations. So I can create barcodes, big QR codes, or I could take textual information blocks. I can create all of those using any info in any of these tags. So that's what you can do there. And then we have, this is the mirroring, this is the recto verso. This is the nesting. So here I decide how I want to nest and how many files I want to collect before I actually create the nest, right? Because there is no point in automating my output file if I'm only going to have one little sticker on the big sheet. No, I want to collect stuff that goes through the same recipe, and I want to fill my sheet, then I want to print the whole sheet. So I have settings that define that my minimal fill ratio has to be 75%. I can tell it to wait for a certain time. I could say, okay, you have to keep nesting until 8:30 in the morning before you create the first print file for today. And I can collect all the files that came in at night and give you a print file in the morning when you're ready to start working. So stuff like that can be defined. And then I have to define my cut method. So I can create a cut PDF, or I can let Caldera Rip do that. And I have my export option. So if I want to work with the full automatic version, I have to turn on my automatic PDF exports. Otherwise, I won't get a print file. I'll just have them waiting around here. Okay, so I have those files in the input folder. I can just click start, and we'll see that the flow starts working. There we go. Then we'll see our files come in automatically because they're in the input hot folder. And they will be started, treatment will start immediately at the bottom right. You see creating layout. It sees files coming in and it starts treating them. Now, because it starts treating them immediately, it's going to keep on nesting until any of my nesting requirements are reached. So in this case, those requirements are made to just work out for the demo. So I will have my files ready here. In other cases, if you see it keeps thinking, it's because it's waiting for more files to reach that limit that you're looking for. Okay, so it created two gangs. I spoke about ganging and nesting. It created a gang for customer ID 1 and a gang for customer ID 2, and it separated the files that I had that were made for those two IDs. If I click these, we can see what's up. So this layout has 3 big penguins and has a whole bunch of small ones and some chopsticks all nested together to optimally use the space. And you can see I only need 1 copy of this file. If I take the second one, we have most of the rest of these round penguins and a bunch of chopsticks. And I need 2 copies of this, which means that it's counted to give me the right number of penguins if I print this file twice. And I have a third file that contains basically what's left, and it wants 1 copy of that. So this is the one that contains the most white space. And if I hadn't made my nesting layout to just accept this, it would wait until it has more files to put on there before it exported this layout. And then I have my second gang, which contains a bunch of stuff as well. That's because I have a customer ID 1 and a customer ID 2, and it is told to gang according to customer ID. Now these files are here. My automatic PDF export is on. That means that my files are already in my printer. I can open up my RIP, and we'll see right here, we have the same files. We have this 3, 2, and 1 file. And it also knows how many I'm supposed to print. I don't think I actually set that correctly in my RIP input in my file manager, but because my file is exported, knowing that I need 2 copies, oh, I actually didn't do it here either, I think. I can stop this because it's done. So if I stop this flow and we look, yeah, it contains at the back of the name, it contains copies. This copies is not the same copies from the image. It's the amount of copies I need to print the sheet with, which means that at least one of my sheets should end with a 2. There we go. This one ends with a 2 because I have to print that one twice. You can have Caldera Rip automatically recognize this. If you put your file manager options that way, that it looks at the file name, it will automatically recognize the material and also the amount of copies, and then it will be ripped for 2 copies here. It's only 1 because I didn't do that. These also gave me errors. Normally you would see them here at the top in blue. They gave me errors because I am ripping them to a Stylus Pro 7900, an Epson printer that can't do this file size. I made these files to be flatbed printer size because that shows the nesting really nicely. And my printer can only do 24 inches. So you see that this gave errors for 24 inches. If I change my settings in Caldera, you can see my printer is here and it has a Prime Center sheet lit up. If I change this to 24 inches and I open one of these files, and then I change my settings here to basically make it fit. So if I, this is not on, so it's already scaling, right? Yeah, it already scaled down. If I let it scale, and I don't care about the fact that it scales down for this, and I close this, I can also save this setting. So I have to save my configuration. This configuration is what the Caldera RIP side of this automation relies upon. This configuration here called print has these settings. It has the resolution, it has the paper, which is now changed again. So I'll put it back on 24. It has my color profile, which is related to my media, and it has my action, in my case, RIP. If I were to put that on print, then it would automatically start printing in my RIP as well. Also, all of the settings at the bottom. So everything to do with this, with the marks I'm creating, with step and repeat that I'm doing, with the cutting line that I'm adding. So I'm adding my mark here for my zoom out plotter. This is all part of the configuration, spot color management and color management as well. So all of that is saved in here, which means that you can set this all up perfectly and then automatically have stuff be profiled by that. And then I have my hot folder, which is over here in the special tab, which is where my files drop into. So I have this demo input hot folder, which loads my files into my Café tab, which has this configuration linked to it, my Stylus Pro 7900 print configuration. I can edit that hot folder and I can look at these parameters. And I can also look at these fileman parameters. And I believe here I should be able to set up the naming. So it automatically looks at that name and gets the number of copies from it. Here we go. So if I turn this on, it's going to look at that format. So I'll do that. I'll let that be turned on. I'll say OK. That is now saved into this hot folder. I can say OK. The print config was updated, so that's also good. I can quit this. Now, if I remove these files all from my inputs and I do this again, delete, yes, you can delete my layouts as well. And I do this again, so I'll press start again, let those files come in. We should see that they now end up at the bottom, at the top here in blue, and they should also have recognized that we want 2 copies of that last document, which has a 2 at the end. Because now they wouldn't be too big and it would recognize that file name. And that means that these files are coming in from my web shop. They are going through my preflighting. They are going through my layouting. The preflighting, of course, could go wrong. You could have error messages. In that case, those files would be routed to an error folder. You would get an error message at the top that says, oh, you had a problem with this file. And you could see the PDF Toolbox preflight reports pop up as a PDF report that you could look at, or you could have an XML report, which could again be parsed by some automated workflow, which could then, well, give you messages, send you emails, tell the customer their file is wrong, whatever you want. So this is happening. These nests, these layouts are created again. The PDF export is on. We should see them come into our hot folder and go into our flow. This is exciting, waiting for it to pop up. I shouldn't need this up anymore. Let's put that down for a second. Let's check that folder. So the Caldera in is what we're looking at. There are no files in here. These icons probably just mean that they are erroring in our, did I not save this properly? I might not have saved that properly. It also gave me a different result this time, because it says this one I have to print 3 times. Which is also kind of cool. This is because Prime Center nesting is new every time it does it. So Prime Center, even if you throw the same files in multiple times, will not necessarily give you the same results every single time because it's an intelligent process. It's looking at all your files. It's trying to put them together in the most intelligent way, and you give it a certain amount of time to do that. So I can decide in my nesting tab how long it's allowed to think. And you see this time, it only gave me one big penguin of my sheet, and it tells me to print this sheet 3 times to get to my 3 penguins that I requested. So that's how it did it this time. And it's a different result, but it's going to give us the same amount of prints in the end. The second file is also slightly different. Less white space left over, and I only have 2 files for customer ID 1 instead of 3, which means that I have 1 less job to rip normally. So I'm not quite sure why they're not yet come in here. Maybe it's because these are still here. I'll delete that. I'll just do it one more time. So stop this. I'll remove these layouts again. Yes, you can delete those layouts as well. And I also remove the stuff from the input folder. So all of these, I'll also throw these out just to make stuff easier. Let's check if my hot folder is properly running, and then I'll run it again. In the meantime, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, any suggestions for stuff that we could make better, feel free to speak up or put something in chat. Pick my wanted configuration, say, okay, it is running. So I should be able to just click start again, have those files come in. Have those layouts be created, and then see them pop up in the spooler, which is still slightly visible here on the side. Might be something to do with the paper size, because the files that I'm creating here are 1200 by 1500, 2500 even. So they're a lot bigger than a 24-inch roll, though my printer config is set to simply scale them to page size. So that should account for that part of the problem. So again, we have our files come in. Are they also going to the output location? Have a look. Yeah, so we have our files here. They're still giving me Dropbox errors. So I'm wondering if that is what's causing it. Maybe they're not completely there yet. Maybe we are too fast. They're still being exported. Because for the last one, I gave them quite a bit of time. I think we should give them a bit of time and see if they end up in there once Dropbox has correctly processed them, and once they are completely exported from Prime Center, because I think we're being a bit fast. Okay, so this is essentially what we wanted to show today, partially because we want to show Prime Center and how it can be automated. You see the results that it's delivering. So it's delivering ready for print, pre-flighted PDF documents that can contain your die lines, that will automatically, intelligently nest your files together in a good way. We can automate Caldera RIP, which is also something that surprisingly with customers, I always notice they don't really do. Typically, people, what they do is they go to File Manager, they navigate to their folder, then they select the files that they want, and they say, okay, I want to open this file. Then they drag that file onto a printer. So I go to my printer, I take my file, I drag it onto my printer, and then I choose my stuff and I click print. And that's the action that they repeat for every single Caldera file that they're processing, which is a lot of work. While even if you only use the hot folder to input your files into an image bar, it will already help you save the step of opening the file manager, navigating to files, and all that stuff. And here, typically what I would do once I'm sure that my files are ready is select those files. So from here to here, for example, I have just processed. I can right click, I can mark these. Where is the mark button? Mark, and I can say, okay, these are done. And then they're checked, and I can manage that these files have actually been processed by my system. So it looks like it's not going to let me show you the end result, but you saw them in the flow earlier. Those were the ones I processed when I still had the big paper size on. So I'm assuming it's because it doesn't like me trying to make those huge files happen. So yeah, that's the story that we're telling here. If there are no questions, no comments. No, okay. There are recordings of all the sessions we have done for the 4-Pees Café. So I think something just appeared in the chat. Curious to understand who has a software from Caldera. So Micha is doing some sales there. Which RIP you have really doesn't matter in this process. The Prime Center tool is made to fit as a single application in any existing workflow. You have an input hot folder, you have an output hot folder. The input files can be images, PDFs, or those XMLs that have the right format. The output file will be a ready for print PDF file that you can then just put into your RIP. And any RIP should be able to handle a nice PDF file. So you can have the power of the nesting, you can have the power of the pre-flighting in your Prime Center, no matter if you have a Caldera RIP or an Onyx RIP or any other RIP that you would have already in your workflow. So no worries there. If you want to test that. There is also a trial for Caldera Prime Center. So if you want to test it out and see if it works for you, that is possible. If you want to see what kind of pre-flighting you can do, what you can do with your files when they come into Prime Center to automate your input process, that is actually the complete PDF Toolbox pre-flight engine that is integrated inside Prime Center, which means that if you know how to handle PDF Toolbox, you can do a whole lot of stuff. And there's lots of videos on what you can do with that tool on our YouTube channel. I think there are a few videos on Caldera stuff on our YouTube channel as well. Feel free to watch something or come back to us with any questions you may have down the line, and we will help you get set up or test with a trial. No worries there, we can do that. So if that's all in the questions we have, then I would again like to remind you of the next cafe next week, which is IC3D automation, which means they're going to take a packaging that they made already and they're going to show us how to automatically change the artwork on the packaging. So you can have, for example, a yogurt cup, and you can replace the label with all the different flavors of yogurt that you have, and then automatically exports to the high-res ray traced renders with several angles with the camera and several settings, and you can have all that happen automatically, so you don't have to manually mess with your file every time that you want to change the artwork. That's what they're going to talk about in next week's cafe. You can see the lineup for all the future cafes on the 4-Pees website. You need company and then events. That's where they're lined up, and that's also where you can register. So I would like to thank all of you for attending today's cafe. I hope that it was interesting and that you saw something that you like, that is useful to you. Feel free to contact us with any further follow-up questions on this. And I wish you all a very nice evening today, and I hope to see you in the next one.